So,
Okay.
good morning, everybody, and welcome. Our speaker this morning, obviously, is Richard Jones. I'd like to just get events underway. I'd just like to, in a minute, I'll ask Richard to say a grace for us. But before we do that, I'll just run through very quickly the couple of admin points. And the most important one is to tell you that, of course, we are recording. So if you don't want to be seen, then you can turn off your video by clicking on the camera icon at the bottom of the screen. We have muted most of your microphones. A couple of people are due to speak, so we have left them unmuted, but just to avoid the background noise, if you need to adjust your volume, you can do that with the microphone icon at the bottom. And of course, during question time, we will be taking questions, and we will unmute people as we go, as we need to. Okay, so
sorry, Bill. Do you want to say whether the question and answers will be recorded as well?
Well, everything is recorded.
Right. Okay.
Everything is recorded. So even this bit. Okay, so Richard, could I ask you to just get get us underway today with a blessing, please?
Sure. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of this day, that through technology we can come together. We thank you, Lord, that your Son told us that wherever 2 or 3 gathered in my name, there I am also. And Lord, you are with us this morning. We pray your blessing on our time together. We continue to build our Christian community as we share in your life, and your blessing upon those we love. Amen.
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 Thank you, Richard. Now, I don't know about you, but I was actually sorely disappointed to learn that Freedom Day had been put back. So I thought I should find someone to tell us some jokes to lighten the mood. So I thought I'll ask Colin. Colin, do you know anyone who could tell us a few jokes to lighten the mood?
I've no idea. Never. Perhaps I ought to plunge straight in, should I?
Yeah, I think so, on that happy note.
Okay. First of all, good morning, gentlemen mainly, but there may be a lady or two around, so welcome to you as well. And today I have for you 3 jokes involving the first one, a film, the second one, a father, and the third one, a food. So let's have the first one with a film. What is E.T. short for? What is
extraterrestrial?
No. What is E.T. short for? He has little legs.
Oh,
Oh, good groan, good groan. Okay, let's see if we can improve on that, shall we? The second one is about a father. How did I find out that my father was stealing from his job as a road worker? How did I find out that my father was stealing from his job as a road worker?
Do you know, I don't know, Colin. How did you find that out?
Well, when I went home, all the signs were there.
Oh, of course, yeah. Cool.
I know. Sorry, it didn't get any better, did it? Let's go for the third and final, shall we? See if I can make amends. Anyway, the third one, we've had a film of father, now a food. Someone took my cheese. What did I think? Someone took my cheese.
Cheesed off.
What did I think? How dare he?
Oh dear. No, it didn't get any better. Anyway,
no, sorry, it didn't, did it? Never mind.
There's always next month.
I was hoping the groan might get a bit louder, but it didn't. Never mind.
Well, that's because we've got people muted. They're silently groaning to themselves.
Oh, well, never mind.
Okay. Yeah. I've just asked Peter Stanyard to just say a few words of introduction for Richard. Difficult for Peter because everybody knows Richard, but yes. Off you go, Peter.
Well, on the basis that not everybody knows everything, I'm not going to say everything, but perhaps some major points. Richard was born in India and later, just a bit later, studied law and politics at university. He then had a career in management consultancy and then senior management in commercial and not-for-profit organisations. He was ordained in 2004 when he became a curate to the Anglican parish of Ashtead. But in 2008, we lost him to an appointment as the vicar of Barscough in the Liverpool diocese. But then in 2015, Ashtead needed a new rector, and to the delight of the congregations, Richard Jones was appointed. He's married to Jo, who's very active in the parish life, and they have 2 university-age children. He confesses to supporting a rugby club called Harlequins.
Oh, another one.
A lot of sinners in Ashtead. Now, what is nearly 2 years ago, he set off on a sabbatical, and this morning we're going to hear how very productive he made this time. So over to you, Richard.
Well, Peter, thank you, and thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for your patience. My sabbatical was January to March last year, and I was due to be speaking to you a year ago, so I hope it's worth waiting for. I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes and hopefully not tire you out with too many slides. I'm going to use some slides to illustrate what I'm doing. We'll just get those up. There we are. You can see that. So the sabbatical, you'll see there's a common thread on the left-hand side. And that was very good books to study, a notebook to take notes as I read and studied and met with people. And I visited lots of coffee shops along the way. I visited 4 countries, spent 58 nights away, traveled 28,000 miles, which was not very good for the environment, used 8 different modes of transport, and there were 3 objectives. One was to really study in depth what it means to look after the environment. As a Christian, we're familiar with that injunction with Genesis, but to be honest, I'd never really studied it and thought about it. What does that look like in my life and in the life that we all have as Christians day to day? Secondly, I wanted to visit churches and to see how they were building disciples with people who are, how can I put it, felt that perhaps they didn't need God in their lives. And thirdly, it was a personal time of personal refreshment. So I started on January the 1st. I flew to Vancouver in Canada for 2 weeks. And as you can see, it was very snowy. That's Regent College. It's one of the world's leading theological colleges, the English-speaking world. And I spent 10 days doing a very enjoyable course on the theology of creation and our response to being stewards of God's creation. And that was one of my first learnings, if I can say that, is the fact that we don't call it the environment, because if we call it the environment, which I'd done all my life, that's taking God out of the picture. So we call it creation. God is the creator. He maintains the creation, and creation is ongoing. So that was my first insight. And then in a very deeply theological way, and also refreshingly in a very practical way, what does it mean for us to be stewards of God's creation? I studied with about 10 other people from around the world, got to know them well. And it involves an organization called Arosha, which is a worldwide organization of Christians who are committed to really sort of rolling up their sleeves and looking for the context where they live. So that was a very rich time. The learnings of that will finally be seen by the parish of Ashtead in October, when we start to really look into creation in our teaching and intentionally in our discipleship program. After two and a bit weeks in Vancouver, I flew to Portland, and that's a genuine sign. Portland, as you'll see, is described by Time magazine, or was, as the most irreligious city in America. It is very hedonistic, it is very liberal. It's got a population of about 700,000 people. It's the capital of Oregon. 47% of those 680 live within the metropolitan area of Portland. It's become a very affluent and young place because lots of the new tech companies, as well as Nike, are based there. And churches have struggled. But in Portland, there's a very successful church, been going for about 20 years, called Bridgetown. It's called Bridgetown because Portland has 7 bridges. And they have pioneered a way of really connecting with young professionals and any young person in their 20s and 30s and helping them to meet Jesus and to grow as Christians in a very orthodox way, but with a great commitment to their local context. Because if you've been to Portland, this is a common sight. That's just one. Every street corner, tragically, you'll see men and women living in tents. It's called a city of bridges. I came to see of it as being a city of tents, with sadly great issues of homelessness and of addiction. And the church is right slap bang in the middle, showing Christ's love practically as well as building community. So I wanted to visit this church because of its context and to see how they were nurturing, committed disciples in the 20s and 30s so that I could learn something, as one always does. So this is the church. It's 1960s building that's been remodeled. And there's the pastor, a man called John Mark Comer. He's become quite a very popular author and speaker. His latest book is called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which is all about slowing down and being with Jesus and living in the moment and knowing what it is to be disciples and to flourish as Christians in a chaotic business world. In a sense, they're building very much on the monastic traditions in the church. So they talk about practicing the way. You may know from the Bible that the first Christians were not called disciples or Christians. They were called followers of the way, because Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so there are three things that they ask worshippers in Portland if they want to become part of the community. They look to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what Jesus did. And behind that, in this loving community of about 1,500 people, which is growing all the time, they are very keen and almost insist that you join a community and follow the spiritual practices. So for example, so the first thing is to practicing the way. That means to disciple. There's an expectation that you read your Bible regularly, that you pray, you practice and benefit from silence and solitude. You honor the Sabbath. That's in addition to Sunday. So you'll take one day a week of just total rest and recreation, that you'll be intentional and committed to church gatherings, to your community, and to generosity with your time, your talents, your treasures, and your home. It's a fully biblical church, so you live under the authority of scriptures and the elders. What does that look like? Well, every small group, and everyone's encouraged to be in a small group. Small groups assigned are based upon where you live. So you can't pick and choose. So where you live determines like your zip code or where it's easy for you to get to. You join a small group. You meet every week. You start with a meal, as you see. That's a requirement. Very strict on that. And then you participate in some way with the meal. Then after that, there's a time of fellowship and of teaching and of sharing. When they gather in church and there are multiple services, that you sit together, that you share in extracurricular activity helpers, and then here that you really practice what the early church was known for, sharing Christian love practically in action, helping each other out with the school run. Some of the small groups I met, they'd helped with financial situations, those types of things. This struck me. Show each other courtesies, like always returning text messages. That's the level of discipleship detail that's sort of expected. It is not a cult. It's a very loving, grace-filled church, but they're very intentional about how they're expecting the fruit of the Spirit to be growing. You're also expected then to be part of showing Christ transforming love in your community. So they do a lot of work with refugees as well as with the homeless, with the sex workers, and they do it quietly. They don't draw attention to themselves. It's very practical. And then if you're part of leadership, you attend and you're regularly these meetings, you participate in prayer meetings, you arrive on time. So there's a very, very clear structure, and God is honoring their ministry. So I had about 8 days with them, and they were so warm and friendly. I now consider them to be, friends as much as you can be when they're on the west coast of America, and learned a great deal from them and enjoyed sharing in what they were doing to share God's love in Portland. After Portland, I took the train to Seattle. That, if you don't know, is the world headquarters of Amazon. Amazon started in Seattle, and Jeff Bezos, as we know, I think is the world's richest man. They are 3 huge biospheres full of tropical plants and vegetation. That is the employee cafe. Inside there, they have their own sort of, restaurants and places. And so it's a very anonymous building, apart from those 3 biospheres, which is certainly very distinctive. And that's, so that's Amazon's world headquarters with their own Amazon biosphere inside, which you use as your employee cafe and place of meetings. I didn't get to go in because I don't know anybody who works in Amazon. And I went to Seattle because A, I like coffee, and they're very good at coffee. It's a nice place to visit. I visited Boeing and saw Boeing's airplanes being made, but also it's full of professional people. LinkedIn is based there. Starbucks is based there. So I spent some time in churches getting to know Christians from that sort of background. How are the churches in connecting with these people? And here I am worshiping at Starbucks. That's one of the very interesting Starbucks there. That is coffee being made in a way that I'd never experienced before. It's not black magic, it's coffee, I can assure you, being made fresh before my eyes. So, as I said, I did drink a lot of coffee on my sabbatical. But it's fascinating, connecting with the churches and getting to become acquaintances with people who are working in these large organizations and hearing their testimonies and their stories. After that, I flew to Rio de Janeiro, which is not very good for the environmental footprint. That's me on top of Sugarloaf Mountain, and there you see Copacabana Beach below you. Why did I go? Well, St. Giles and St. George's, supported for many years a CMS mission partner who was actually on sabbatical. So he was over here and preached in St. Giles and St. George's when I preached in his church. So I spent 2 and a bit weeks in Rio. That's the Anglican Church, English speaking in Rio. So I had the privilege of preaching and teaching and leading some courses. And then above the church there, you'll see on the right-hand side, the statue of Christ the Redeemer, which dominates the city. I had the great joy of getting the cable car up there, and there it is. It's truly staggering with some beautiful views. And Rio, it's a hedonistic party place. It's full of the very rich and also the very, very poor, and with a dwindling Christian impact, but you see it. So that slide there is just an entrance to one of the gardens, municipal gardens, and we see the Christian messaging there. So although it's a very hedonistic city, the Christians are very much there and trying to show God's love. So I had the great privilege, and I didn't take photographs for obvious reasons, of just partnering some people who are working in the favelas, with the very poor people, with the gang culture and the prostitution and drugs. And that was a very moving couple of days, just doing what I could, helping out where I could, and learning and seeing at the sharp end what it is to minister to people who are living in these shanty towns, where your life is watched by the godfather of the drugs ring and the madam of the brothel. And it was inspiring just to see how the Christians are really working in the favelas. And that's just a stone's throw from Copacabana Beach. So you have this contrast of desperate, desperate need. And then you have one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, overseen by Christ the Redeemer, one of the 7 wonders of the world. And that's a very powerful motif, that the Lord Jesus Christ, Christ the Redeemer, is looking down over Rio, weeping, I'm sure, but also offering his salvation to the large population there. Because you don't have to walk very far off the beaches, and this is what you see. People, that's their living. That I understand, because I got to speak to the person on the right, or through a translator, that's his belongings. Tragic stories of people just scratching a living, not all subjected to drugs and prostitution, but a fair number. And that's the context of Rio, just a few meters away from the beach. This is a project which is about 2.5 hours drive outside Rio, as the parish church, we've had the privilege of praying and supporting a project in Margay. Margay is a municipality within Greater Rio, about 2 hours away. It's a very poor area. Of the 700,000 people who I'm told live in the large area, 55% are below the poverty line. Crime, corruption, you name it, it's there. This is a project in a swamp. Although the pictures don't indicate it, this is a swamp area where 3,000 people are trying to scratch a living primarily from fishing in polluted waters. 3,000 people have no running water. 3,000 people have no toilet. These 3,000 people's lives are dominated by several gangs and drugs cartels and madams who run brothels. This is a project which St. Giles and St. George's, as I say, is praying and for funding through the CMS partner that we had. The church bought the land, and what's being built there on the right-hand side is a double story of classrooms, because male role models are in short supply. The males are either part of the drugs cartel or dead or in prison. So the small Anglican church is trying to show positive male role models. So they're building classrooms there to give some basic education. Behind it, they're building a very simple and small sort of play area because there's nowhere for people to play. On the left-hand side, you see the first of 3 toilet blocks with clean running water. And on that site, which is not that big, I have to say, is also going to be a place where young women can come and have some basic education. A doctor can come and visit, gynecological care, all those things in the process of being built. And this was truly humbling. I was reduced to tears my 2 days there because I was treated like a king, because I was the person who was coming from the church that were paying for this. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm just a member of Christ Church. Very, very moving. And this is one of the volunteers from the local church, some of the kids who live nearby. Those kids have not got parents. Or if they had parents, they don't know where they are. They're not in school. The girl on the left, her mother is in prison for being a drug mule. That's her looking after her young daughter. They live in one of the most horrible tin shacks I've ever seen, but yet you see the smile on her face through the love of the local church. That's the curate of the local Anglican church on the right-hand side. I should tell you that the curate is not paid. So he is serving the Lord and just, coming and ministering every day, whether it's playing the guitar, teaching, playing football, doing all sorts of things. Remarkable. And this is his church in Margay. That's the size of the Anglican church, holds about 30 people. Very, very ordinary. And I had the privilege of just participating in a small way in some of the ministry there in Margay. So very, very humbling, quite a contrast to the metropolitan wealth of Rio. Sorry, and then after some time there, I flew to San Francisco because we have some very good friends who live there. So a little bit of a break, my wife joined with me, but I principally went to actually visit Menlo Park. Menlo Park is an hour and a half's drive from San Francisco. For those of you who know what a zip code is, it's the equivalent of a postcode in America. This is the 3rd most prosperous zip code in all of North America. This church is an independent Presbyterian church founded in the 1860s. Facebook was founded in Menlo Park. Its world headquarters are a 10-minute drive. Stanford University is 5 minutes drive from the church. Apple Computer in Cupertino is a 20-minute drive. Google, Sergey and Larry, who I don't know them, who founded Google, was in Menlo Park. This is a staggeringly wealthy part of the world. It's a very pretty, ordinary place. And this is the church that, by God's grace, has grown and has a congregation of 6,500 on 6 different multi-sites. Condoleezza Rice, the former Secretary of State, the President of the United States, is an active member of the congregation. I was in a church service with Condoleezza Rice, and a few other people. And so I spent 10 days with them, well, on and off, you know, what was their ministry strategy, what was going on, what was it working, how they're reaching out, not just to the wealthy, but also the underclass in the Bay Area. Here's another picture of what they do. They have a tagline which they use at the start of every service. Everybody's welcome, nobody's perfect, anything's possible with God. That ties in with the entrepreneurial culture of Southern California, you know, that you can do anything. But it also ties into people whose dreams and lives have been broken through whatever reason. And this church was not just full of the very successful people. I was struck by Southern Californian times how representative it was. Well, that's assuming you could afford to live there, because you couldn't. But they have 6 campuses around the Bay Area, and they're much more normally priced neighborhoods, which I didn't visit, and that's more normal. Their ministry strategy is actually very similar to Ashtead's, and I was humbled that their senior pastor asked for some of the notes that I use here of having a different menu of services and the strategy of pathways they had just been working through. So that was very flattering to do that. This is one of their services. It's called the Cafe. So you go in and it's like Starbucks inside with comfy chairs. You get free croissants and coffee and you chat. And then you go in and you sit like on beanbags or nice chairs. And this is their cafe expression. So though it's a very large church, this service only holds 80 to 100 people, this service. It's one of 9 services that day, plus the 6 other campuses. So they have different expressions, as we as St. Giles and St. George's offer different expressions. And then as with many other American churches, after your church service, you then go and do your small group. So you go to one of the church buildings and do your small group, and then invariably you go out for lunch together. So pretty much Sunday was church day. And that's because it was very rare for people to meet midweek, just a different dynamic in Southern California because of a different rhythm of life. I then flew back after about 40 days in the States to the UK, kissed my wife, kissed the kids, did the washing in that order. And the next day I went to a 3-day silent retreat in Lawn Abbey. This is owned by the Church of England. It's a conference and retreat centre for the Diocese of Leicester. It's about 18 miles to the east of Leicestershire. And I went on a very moving, guided 3-day silent retreat. That house was built on a former Augustinian monastery, which Thomas Cromwell, under Henry VIII, was leading to dissolve, but he liked it so much that he kept it. So if you know Hilary Mantel, that's Thomas Cromwell's house that he sequestrated before he was then killed for his faith. So that was a very rich time, just meeting with God in the silence and the stillness, reflecting and praying and being shaped by that time. I then went up to Edinburgh to a large Church of Scotland Anglican church called P&G's. They have a vibrant ministry to the homeless and to the needy in Edinburgh, as well to the educated. So they were very kind. They opened their hearts and their lives to me, of just sharing and learning from them. I did a little bit of teaching at their request there. Again, seeing how a local church connects with the local people, the very educated and affluent, as well as the underclass, as well as people in needs. This is not part of the church, but I was really struck by this. It's a cooperative that has started around Edinburgh, which is a very nice cafe, all organically sourced, etc. And it's there to raise the profile of those in need and to give work to those who are struggling to find paid employment. And they had this lovely thing called Pay It Forward. So you could go in and buy your sort of simple lunch or a cup of coffee, then you could pay extra and the equivalent of a Post-it note, you put it on a board, then someone could come in and take it and they could have a free lunch or coffee. And I thought, what a great idea. A way of just sharing on Christ's love, and you're blessing a stranger who's in need. So that was really lovely. And again, I spent some time with them just washing dishes before I went on a couple of day pilgrimage, staying in some very simple places, enjoying God's creation, thinking and praying around Scotland. Then I came back and went on a 3-day church leaders conference. The guy on the right is not a member of the Proclaimers. He's a guy called Jimmy Dale. He is the head of youth ministry to the Church of England. So I had the privilege of spending a bit of time with him, as well as sitting in on a seminar. So that was 3 days, a meeting with him and about 100 other church leaders from around the country. From there, I went to York. A good friend of mine is the rector of St. Michael le Belfray. So I spent time with Matthew and his family, shared in their ministry and learnt from them how they are ministering to the context of York. And then I did say coffee shops were part of it. I thought this was fun. This is a coffee shop in York. E equals MC squared. Energy comes from milky coffee. So there we are, a bit of fun. And then finally, St. Michael le Belfray with the Church of England have 18 people left St. Michael le Belfray with one of their curates, and they've done a church plant in the centre of Newcastle. They've taken effectively a nearly redundant church in central Newcastle, been given £1.5 million from the strategic fund of the Church of England, and they have planted a church to reach out to the large student body and young professionals within central Newcastle. So I just went along and sort of learnt and helped out at St. Thomas's in the early days for a couple of days with them. And I came home for a week to write it all up. Where is the church? Well, as you can see from that cartoon, it's everywhere. And that's what I certainly saw in my 10 weeks. The Church of Jesus Christ was alive and functioning so beautifully in every context, in every place. So I had a week to write it all up, to come back with lots of ideas, to talk and to pray with the staff team to develop our strategy, only to find that we were straight into COVID, and a week later the church was shut. So there we are.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much. So that was my sabbatical. Learnings I've tried to bring in and to share during the limitations of lockdown, but more will be coming as, God willing, we return to a more normal pattern of worship.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Now I'm just trying to figure out, I'd like to go back into gallery mode so we can then have a look around and see if we've got any questions for you. And I'm trying to figure out how I turn off your... Ah, there we go. There we go. Right, okay. Do we have questions for Richard on that? Well, I have a question to start off. I mean, there's just so much stuff there, Richard, and so many different locations, so many different challenges seem to be there. You say you come back and you write all that up, and I guess I'm bemused. What do you make of it? What do you see as the main things that you would like to do? Let's ignore COVID, and you know, give you a magic wand. What are the key things that you've taken from that and would like to implement?
Well, thank you. The first thing was really sort of understanding my responsibility as a follower of Jesus to look after creation. So that's in our home life, but also in the role that I'm privileged to have, you know, within the church. So we put some things together and are working on how we can make caring for creation not just part of our teaching, but encouraging, you know, the worshippers in St. Giles and St. George's to be aware of that, and to be, you know, without thinking you're being lectured at, you know, to care for our creation. So I got some very practical applications of that to bring in, so that it's not just, you know, Sunday only, it's all life, little things that we can do. So how we can then roll that out, that was one thing. Secondly, about the intentionality of the church, of its vision and structure. I was struck particularly by some of the churches, how they knew what they were about, and they were intentional about sharing Christ's love and weren't shy in a very realistic way. And then internally, just meeting with those senior church leaders, how they sort of led their churches as servant leaders. So there's lots for me to reflect on in terms of what I try and offer in the role that I've been privileged to have.
Okay. James. Oh, hang on. You've gone back on I'm going to ask you to unmute. You've somehow managed to go back onto mute.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. That was an amazing tour, and you must feel still very refreshed. I mean, it's so exciting. I just wonder, could you tell us how it is done in, I think it was San Francisco, where you can introduce Christ to people who have everything or think they have everything? How do you, what message do they receive best?
Well, thank you. I could speak for a long time on that, but I'll keep it to headlines. The thing that I found, I learned from the senior leadership there, is that those people want to involve in something really big. You know, the world is so much bigger than themselves, and it's almost like they want a big challenge. So it's helping to set the gospel in terms of the universal context, that you're part of the overarching story of salvation. It's about the transformation of the whole universe. Now, that's a very positive message, and that this can be done, that God is doing it. So to help them to think that you're part of the transformation of humanity is very engaging. Because a common thing with lots of these very successful, educated people are very philanthropically minded. For example, a friend of mine I used to work with in my first job ended up on the board of eBay. Retired at 40, as you do, and now lectures at Stanford University. And he's big in the philanthropic organization. He's not a Christian yet, Matt, but it's this big story that they're involved in. And so you invite them into the bigger story, and then, well, actually, how can I help? Rather than just throwing money at it, how can I roll my sleeves up? So what the church does, it organizes lots of programs in the, it's some distance away because of property prices, to help people with extra tuition in schools, or people who are struggling with drugs or those types of things, and actually taking those people from behind their computers to meet real people, to share Christ's love with educational programs and basic old-fashioned mission. Another big thing that they do is they take mission trips from California all over, and I mean all over South America. And so they take people out of their comfort zones and see God at work in ordinary lives. And then also their teaching is very deep teaching, which encourages debate and discussion and room for the Holy Spirit.
Thank you. That's very interesting, Richard. Thank you. Yes.
Do we have any more? Mike, hold on a second. Let's see if we can get you unmuted. Okay.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Excellent. Actually, just on the, before I ask Richard the question, just on the issue of muting, I think it's great to have the general muting when the speaker's speaking, but I really do miss the opportunity for ritual abuse of Colin at the beginning.
Well, you have the floor at the moment, so
I know.
That
monthly opportunity is the very reason I tune in, for crying out loud. Richard, this is a grand world tour, but it's interesting. It's also a tour of a sort of the types of church community, Christian communities, and you speak about, I mean, we know about the trend to mega churches in the northern parts of the States, and you've experienced some of that, but you also experienced, the tiny churches in Margay and, other places, I'm sure. So this is probably not a very tactful question to ask, but where did you feel Christ was more present?
Thank you. That's a very good question, Mike. It was around people when I knew there was authentic love. So that's a bit of a cop-out answer. But where people who I knew that really knew Jesus as their Lord and were doing it because they felt compelled to do it. So, for example, I was in churches in Vancouver, some very big, shiny churches, as I like to describe them. And forgive me, this is my just take. I felt there was a church in Vancouver where they bought a former theatre. You may have been to it, some of you have travelled. And it felt from my perspective, a bit like a show. And everything looked great and all the rest of it. And the welcome team, you just felt they were the beautiful people there welcoming you in, but there was no real engagement from the heart. There wasn't the eye contact. So where do I feel Christ was at home is that where people actually gave me eye contact, you know, and truly listen to you. And that could have been, you know, I was talking with someone who was working on artificial intelligence, who worked out of Facebook in a cafe in Menlo Park. And this person was clearly highly successful, but was so humble and godly. You know, you just felt the presence of God in that. They weren't corrupted by what was going on. So I felt most the presence of God with brothers and sisters who truly know Jesus, and that really was their devotion.
Thank you. Thank you. And Colin, your jokes were rubbish.
Well, Mike, at least I'm consistent.
Okay, do we have any more questions for Richard at this stage? Or are we just about there? Oh, yes, we do. Sorry, we have Roger. I see you, Roger. I'm just going to
and Malcolm.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah. I was only going to say, Richard, could you say a little bit more about the church where the house groups were sort of compulsory to join the one in your area? I found that very interesting, challenging, you know. Perhaps I felt there's a bit of over controlling there, but can you say some more on that?
Well, thank you. Your point is well made. And as I described it, it could almost felt as saying, you must do that. But going back to Mike's point, it was a place such grace and love and real warmth that they weren't trying to force you or control you. You just felt, to use Mike's phrase again, the presence of God in that place. So if you want to feel to become more part of it, you know, I went to a welcome event, which they did every 2 weeks. There were 180 people there, and they clearly explained in 2.5 hours the history, the values, the beliefs and expectations of the church. So they clearly laid out this was the pathway, and they said, you know, these are our beliefs. You may disagree, and we respect that, happy to talk about them. But if you want to become actively part of our church, this is what, you know, we invite of you. So nothing was hidden, nothing was controlling. They were all gracious. They weren't trying to persuade you of a different point of view, but to go on the journey. And you felt this loving welcome, so you journeyed on. And so that's where true community was. And of course, it was helped by the fact that when you were sitting in church, people did turn to me and say, hello, what's your name? And so I gave my name, and it clearly became evident they were a small group, but they were outward looking. So you felt there's something attractive about this. Yeah. And you see lovely people who genuinely, from different walks of life, although most of them were 20s to 30s, who were just really nice people. So it didn't feel as if it was you were being told to do it. This was a healthy thing, Roger.
Yeah.
And they told stories. Again, one of my takeaways to tell more stories and services, to hear stories of how God was moving in people's lives, or in a way that wasn't showing off. In the past, I had been and still am probably too shy of saying we're doing X, Y, and Z, because I think it might be misunderstood that it's drawing attention to ourselves and the resources that St. Giles and St. George's is privileged to have. Whereas in the American churches, it was just natural. It wasn't in no way showing or saying, this is what God's doing, praise God, and would you like to join in? Yeah. So that's something I need to work through as well.
Lovely, yeah.
Okay. Malcolm, did you have your hand raised a second ago? I'm just asking you to unmute. There we go.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Richard. It's sort of a similar theme, I guess, that experience in California, how the church has encouraged people to sort of see Sunday as the day to commit to the church, to God, and all the activities around church life in all its forms. Whereas I think some of us, you know, including yourself, have been talking locally here about the pressure on Sundays in family life here, and yeah, whether it's the football team or the visiting, aged parents or family friends or whatever, and the need to, in terms of provision, provide midweek ministry as well as Sunday ministry. I mean, do you have any new reflections on that, bearing in mind what you saw on your travels, or are we just in a different place, really?
Thank you, Malcolm. My reflections are, as I reflect upon, again, just putting those slides together, is the fact that the ministry of Jesus Christ is the same wherever you are, but the context influences it. So the context, that was the context for Menlo Park that worked for them. Whereas Portland, Oregon, it was your Sunday service, you know, an hour and a half, tea, coffee around it, mandatory midweek group on Tuesday, and then your service to the community on another night, other night during the week. Interestingly, Portland didn't have midweek services, but they had prayer meetings every day, which were even then being live streamed that you could join in. The churches in Vancouver, well, I only went to 2, was Sunday. The churches in Seattle was more like us, you know, looking to have a midweek offering because of people's schedules. You know, the people who are working in LinkedIn and all the rest of it, working crazy hours. So that Tuesday was actually a good night of the week for them. So I think the context determines it. But I think, you know, we've got to be context specific. And also, what are we modeling? You know, California, that was their way, but it was the whole family went, Malcolm. So,
right.
Yeah, whereas here, I think we've got to be careful. What are we modeling? You know, you may have non-Christian children, non-Christian partners, you know, and we're now wanting all of your time on Sunday, you know, and Sunday should be a bit more of a day of rest. And going back to Portland, they were, Roger's point is, it was very clear that you're expected to have like a day of rest. Now, I know that's easy when you're in paid Christian work, but how did they do that? They was trying to say as much as you can, you know, make Saturday, you know, a day of rest. And so not scheduling church gatherings on Saturdays.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard.
I see Martin Hiley has a hand raised. So, Martin.
Yes, thank you very much, Bill. Richard, one of the things we celebrate here on Men's Breakfast is a representation from all our churches, all our different denominations.
Yeah.
And that's something very special, I think, to all of us, and something we long to promote more here. What experience did you find in the churches you visited of ecumenism and joining alongside other denominations?
Thank you, Martin. It really struck me in Brazil because of declining Christian imprint, Catholicism being the majority church, that with all denominations is facing its challenges. So although Christchurch was the Anglican church, they were actively working with all the local churches in Rio, praying together monthly and doing shared mission to the favelas and areas. So there was no tribalism. That I should say was one of the things I neglect to say. It really was united. How can we share the love of Christ? And then in Margay, you saw the tiny Anglican church that we've been privileged to have a small part of supporting. Well, that's the largest church in Margay, but there are a couple of sort of small house churches. So some of the folks that you saw there helping the curate are from those small house churches. So they're gathering together, but the Anglican church happened to be taking the lead. In Vancouver, I can't really comment, but it did seem to be a little bit more tribal. For example, on my first Sunday with a bit of jet lag, I went to the local church to where my hotel was, and it was of a denomination which I won't share. And it was like going back to Britain in my childhood, and I got there, hello, nice to see you, you're from England. No one spoke to me in 2 hours. Yeah, and it was a very, yeah. And there was a communion service as well, and we were encouraged to share the peace. Did anyone share the peace with me? No.
Oh dear.
So are we too
I think
tribal?
that's why the following Sunday I didn't have a good welcome. I went to this large church out of interest because I'd heard about it, which had bought this theatre at a cost of $50 million US, as you do. And thinking that there must be something different that draws people in, but it felt a bit like a show. Now, I shouldn't judge on one visit. I'm being unkind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So are we too tribal?
I think that can be true for all of us in different walks of life. But the gospel is Jesus Christ came forward, and I saw that very powerfully in Brazil, and particularly in Rio. You know, all the denominations really working together and praying together. And that was the thing that really struck me, the power of prayer and, whether it's Portland, the daily prayer meetings, to Rio. You know, I don't think I've ever been to as many prayer meetings in 60 days as I did as on my travels. Admittedly, I had a free time, I have to say, but there we are.
Okay. Sorry, Martin.
No, just as we come out of lockdown, I hope that we can actually get together more and meet live for our men's breakfast, so we can share Colin's jokes and his bacon butties.
Okay.
I think
do we have any more questions for Richard? Okay, then in that case, I think in time-honoured fashion, I just asked James to say a few words of thank you to Richard for coming to speak to us this morning. James, over to you. Oh, hang on. Now, how did that happen?
Yeah, right. Thank you. So, Richard, what a wonderful journey you've had. It's absolutely amazing, and you've introduced us at the beginning of another great weekend for all of us. I was thinking, you know, during the sabbatical, you go off, you try something new, and you come back with it, and you bring it into Ashtead or whatever. And during this last 18 months, many of us have been trying new things, as well as being connected to our local churches and live stream services. Many of our local congregations have gone off to Lausanne or North America or Ireland to view other church services. We've taken on Bible study courses. We've done daily devotionals. There are all sorts of things been happening, and these have all been new things that we've all experienced, and or many of us experienced and found very interesting. And yet we've come back. That's the important part. It's very refreshing to go away, but it's great to come back. So thank you very much, Richard. Welcome back, and let's hope we can all get together soon. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, James, and thank you, friends, for listening.
Okay. Well
done, Richard. Thank you.
I should say, I think you should give your thanks to my wife, who allowed me to go away and to use a large amount of the family savings to fund that trip.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I'd just like to add my thanks to Richard for speaking this morning. But there is just one last thing I wanted to say also. As we approach Freedom Day, I thought I should say a few words about returning to the old normal and proper breakfast with coffee and tea and bacon sandwiches. But really, I wasn't sure what I was going to say. So I thought I'd take a leaf out of the Boris Johnson book of speech writing and start by saying that it's our intention, first and foremost, to regain sovereignty over our breakfast, our great British breakfast, but that we will be driven by data and not by dates. So I think you've heard those messages before. We will, of course, be subject to whatever rules are in place at the time, but the signs are looking good, and we're hoping to be able to return to the old normal during the last quarter of this year, maybe as early as September. So I think the main message from what I've just said is please watch this space. We'll obviously keep you up to date with thinking things can change. We've all seen dates get postponed and what have you, but that's the current thinking, possibly September. Okay, so on that note, I will conclude this morning's meeting. Just to say, our next meeting is on the 17th of July. We'll probably give you another update on that then, when our speakers will be from Beatitude. So goodbye until then.